As technology progresses, it enables societies to advance. But innovations need to be understood and trusted and lift us all. In AI, medical, space, climate, technology unlocks human potential. And rules we design today are as important as the technology we create. It's how business delivers technology safely into our hands, and how countries leverage innovation. This partnership between transformative technology and purposeful policy drives growth, ensures investment, builds better societies, and powers human progress. We make innovation work for the world.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Access Partnership's AI Policy Insights. My name is Lydia Dettling. I am your host for today, and I'm delighted to be joined by Dan Nechita, Head of Cabinet for Member of the European Parliament, Dragos Tudorache, co-reporter of the EU AI Act. Dan has been at the forefront of the development of the EU AI Act since day one, and as well as involved heavily in some of the EU's more global initiatives on AI policy. So I have the absolute pleasure to welcome Dan, and today we'll be discussing the EU AI Act and the EU's position in global AI policy development.
Thank you, Lydia.
Before we jump in, I just would like to remind everyone that we will be doing a Q&A session towards the end. So please drop in any questions you have in the comment section or the chat function on whatever platform you're streaming on, and we will try to get to as many of those as possible. Earlier this week, a consolidated text of the EU AI Act was shared publicly and has been sent to EU member states for their review this week, with the hope to have ambassadors sign off next Friday, the 2nd of February. So there have been some rumors that some member states may not be entirely satisfied. So Dan, I turn to you with everyone's burning question at the moment. Is this the final EU AI Act? Are there any possibilities or room for maneuvers, or is this version what we can expect to be approved by member states and ultimately the Parliament?
Well, look, first of all, thank you to Access Partnership and Lydia for having me. It's great to engage in this type of conversation. I'm always thrilled to be able to speak a little bit more freely now that the negotiations are over with stakeholders. So it should be an interesting conversation, and you just foreshadowed that by going in right with one of the questions that are probably on everybody's mind, no? Well, look, I think that at this point in time, this is the final text. There is nothing more that can be changed in the text that would not require new political discussions. And new political discussions means basically that everybody would be going back on what they had already agreed. So we say, and I think it circulates in the Brussels bubble a lot, that a successful negotiation is when everybody is equally unhappy about the outcome. Of course, member states, some of the member states or more of the member states might be unhappy about the final text. As we are in the Parliament, we would have wanted the text to go more in the Parliament position, as is, probably the Commission, who would have wanted to see probably the text closer to what they had proposed. So in the end, I'm fairly confident that this is the final text, the version that you have seen. Of course, that's a very rough draft, right? It will need to be renumbered and so on, but I'm pretty sure that's it.
Fantastic. And you mentioned there that there's some kind of sticking points or member states might be, or the Parliament might be unhappy about certain positions. Maybe for a little bit of context for the audience, would you mind kind of developing a little bit on some of those points, I think it was mainly general purpose AI, open source, law enforcement, where kind of we found the final balance to try to appease all sides on that.
Definitely. I don't know if it's useful, and stop me if it's not. Maybe I can just give an overview of what the EU AI Act is to begin with, and then highlight a little bit of what were the differences between the institutions, and then go into what are remaining points of contention as you asked. So first of all, the EU AI Act deals with the use of artificial intelligence systems in high-risk use cases. And those high-risk use cases are a list of cases where there are threats to the health, safety, or fundamental rights of people from the use of that system. So think law enforcement, think police work, think places where you have a power imbalance, like in the workplace, in education, and so on. Places where you can get discriminated on, and where it's good that the AI system used in that particular context is as safe as possible, so that it doesn't lead to discrimination, breach of fundamental rights, and so on. And I'm giving a very simplistic overview. There is then a category of AI systems or uses of AI systems that we feel are totally in dissonance with the values that we have in the European Union. The use of AI systems for mass discrimination or mass surveillance or categorization that would basically, at a massive scale, such as in non-democratic countries that we know of, would score the citizens, or would enable authorities to conduct mass surveillance, and those we outright prohibit in the European Union. Then you have a category that is more and more relevant of systems that need to be transparent on the fact that end users, so your normal citizen or your normal grandma or consumer on interacting with a system, need to know that they're dealing with that. Those are chatbots, for example, or manipulated images or video, and so on. And then, and this is, of course, rather new, there is another category where we felt, in Parliament in particular, of the very basic AI models, those that are not yet a system. It's a very technical difference, but basically it's the brain. It's not the brain doing anything with an interaction with the outside world, but those can be very, very powerful. And for those, there are certain systemic risks that they can pose to the European Union as a whole, or to member states. We felt that those also need to be in the scope of the regulation. So that's basically the gist of the regulation. Now, the political points in the whole regulation were, of course, dealing with law enforcement, because member states want to use this technology. And here, of course, I also understand, and we also understand that, this technology for legitimate purposes for law enforcement. Parliament felt that certain technologies and certain use cases of AI, such as real-time remote biometric identification, should be outright prohibited. Of course, member states didn't feel the same way, because they want to use that technology. So the landing zone there in the negotiations was, Parliament felt very, very strongly about this. So it's basically prohibited, with certain very, very, very limited exemptions, which are also under very tight democratic oversight and scrutiny. There's a lot of safeguards around this, because we want to prevent the improper use of technology. Then, of course, contentious was also the part on whether or not what we classify as high risk, the list of high risk systems, should be expanded to include more, should be restricted to include less. Then, of course, the definition of what is an artificial intelligence system was also a point of of not necessarily contention, but a point of intense debate, because of course we want to get it right. Then, as you mentioned, the introduction by Parliament of a new set of rules for the very powerful AI models was also seen as departing from the risk-based approach of the initial regulation. And I will say that I do not agree with that assessment. I think it's basically just adapting the regulation to the realities of 2023, 2024, and we have continued to keep the risk-based approach differentiating between those models that are basically harmless and then have very limited obligations dealing with transparency, and those that could pose indeed systemic risks at the European Union level. Those are very few. It's the most powerful models who also have a set of very common sense obligations to mitigate risks, to keep watch on any incidents and so on. So overall, I think that that gives a picture of the main elements of the AI Act, some of the contentious points, but of course, happy to jump exactly into the ones that you prefer and to discuss them and dissecate them a little bit better.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. That was a very comprehensive overview, and it's certainly a complex text. You made it sound quite clear and simple there. So thank you for touching on all those points. And you mentioned the categories, the different categories, and as we're aware, the text itself the timeline for compliance will vary from 6 to 24 months. Depending on the different provisions. So I think 6 months for the prohibited AI, which you mentioned, then 12 months for those general purpose AI provisions. And the text itself does also foresee some further guidance, maybe to be developed by the Commission to help with the implementation of those. So in terms of finding out how companies can comply in this quite short timeline. Some companies will have to comply already, probably by the end of this year. Maybe you can explain a little bit about what other what we can expect between now and those implementation timelines to provide more context and information on how to comply with these obligations and to facilitate the smooth transition and compliance for businesses.
Definitely. So this is going to be rather approximate, but I can explain a little bit of the logic in any one of those different time frames. So what happens now is that there is going to be an adoption of the text by Council and by Parliament through different mechanisms, and then the text will be published in the official journal of the European Union. That is a timeline that can take a few months because of the bureaucracy, because of the time needed to schedule the votes and to get everybody to vote, because of the need to translate the text and of the final proofreading of the text, which is, going back to your first question, it's not going to change the content of the text. It's just the proofreading and the translation. So that's definitely going to happen in the next few months. We have a vote in committee next month. So with that, Parliament is on track to adopt it fairly soon. Then, of course, once it's published into the journal, it enters into force, and then you have those timelines that you mentioned, right? We felt that I explained the rationale for prohibiting the use of certain systems, right? The rationale is using those systems in the way that we have prohibited in the text really goes against what the European Union stands for. We don't want a society where every citizen is assigned a score, and based on that score, it gets unfavorable treatment. We just don't want that, right? So it then makes sense for those prohibitions to enter into force, because why would somebody do that, right? And of course, the prohibitions are are on the use of AI systems, not on companies that are developing AI systems. If you are a company indeed developing a system that you plan to sell to governments so that they can monitor and socially score their citizens so that they can discriminate against them, then yeah, you're in trouble. But to me, that's absolutely legitimate. So that's why it's just 6 months. We don't want that in Europe. Then the 12 months for the powerful models, for the general purpose AI models, is also appropriate because we feel that we need to keep up with the development of technology. And we saw what happened in 2023 with not just OpenAI and ChatGPT, but basically like the storm of very powerful models built in a very accelerated way, also in competition with one another. And we feel that, of course, you cannot have a regulation that by the time you get to apply it, it's irrelevant because the models have evolved so much. Nevertheless, the obligations for those models are light, right? Many of the obligations have to deal with interacting with the EU Artificial Intelligence Office and making sure that those models that present systemic risks are kept under check and are verified for those risks. So that also is legit. Then the 24 months for the other systems is, of course, probably a normal time frame for applying the regulation. So I think that's the logic behind the different stages where this would enter into application.
Thank you. And in the interim of the 24 months, I guess we can expect some developments of the guidelines and perhaps codes of practice already. And maybe could you give a bit of insight on how we see that going, if there will be opportunities for businesses and broader stakeholders to be involved in these discussions, whether they'll be made public, and where we could find out more information about these?
Definitely. This is not something that is, parts of it are, but parts of it aren't in the text and in the regulation, because of course, what we have put there is obligations for the Commission to further develop these guidelines, for the AI office to work on some parts of this, for the Commission to work on the codes of practice. But I can share what I do know, that, for example, now that we have the final text of the AI Act, there is the initiative of the AI Pact, launched by Commissioner Breton, for companies to sign on and in collaboration with the Commission to seek to become compliant with the regulation. And what that means is you work towards compliance earlier, but you benefit from the support of the Commission. So maybe that's one step to go. Of course, this is traditional Parliament. We want stakeholders to be involved in all of these processes. So throughout the text, and you have the text, there are multiple additions by the Parliament where we have requested that, when developing these guidelines, the Commission should consult stakeholders. And of course, there is an entire structure that we have created in the AI office called the Advisory Forum, which should be the place where, in our vision, the way we envisioned it, it's the place where you have industry, you have SMEs, you have academia, and you have NGOs and other stakeholders coming together to have a permanent type of cooperation with the AI office and with the Commission in basically the next steps of the AI Act. And that's not just developing the guidelines and then working to see how standards fit and then working on benchmarks and so on, but it's really constantly learning from the implementation of the regulation, watching how the market evolves, understanding what are real pain points, for example, we had that in mind. In the implementation, it might be something that we didn't think of, right? That everything goes smoothly, but the documentation requirements for Article X are really too onerous. And then, you have that advisory forum there to actually highlight it, bring it to the forefront, and then for further revisions of the regulation to have that on the table.
Absolutely. You mentioned the AI office there, and yesterday as well, there was an announcement that it will be established before the essentially. And so, along with the AI Pact, I gather that there will be lots of opportunities and public discussion before compliance obligations for companies. So, certainly a thing to keep an eye on for everyone. Thank you. Before we turn into kind of the more global role of the AI and global AI policy development, I wanted to touch upon probably one of the more criticized areas of the AI Act, which is innovation. And there's been some criticism that maybe the EU has taken a more stringent approach to regulating AI, such a fast developing technology, and it could potentially have a negative impact on our EU's competitiveness. The AI Act itself does touch upon this a little bit, and yesterday as well, the Commission presented a new AI innovation strategy. So maybe for the audience, could you provide a little bit more insight on what the EU AI Act and the EU more in general is doing to address these concerns?
Definitely. And it's a perfect question, because I always, end up being a little bit frustrated when I get asked this question. I'm hoping that I'll be able to give an answer that would be, clarifying a little bit. So let's start from the very big objective. What do we want with artificial intelligence? We want economic growth, right? Like, that's what we want. We want it to drive our economic growth, to benefit our societies, to help us evolve, right? And to move forward, to be prosperous and happy and have our rights protected and so on. And for that, in the beginning, and I'm defending another institution, but in the beginning, the Commission at one point said, okay, well, we'll do that by working on two different tracks. One is the ecosystem of excellence, and one is the ecosystem of trust. And these are complementary, but they're not the same. For the trust part, you have to work on reducing and mitigating some of the risks, right? Once you reduce or mitigate some of the real risks that artificial intelligence use can bring, and we all know, right? From discrimination in terms of receiving social benefits, if we are to use those systems, to disinformation, misinformation, manipulation of our elections, and so on. All of these, AI can, they're legitimate risks that we need to take into account. So once we reduce those risks, then the technology itself becomes more trustworthy, and therefore there's more adoption. Logically, you're not going to buy a system if you cannot trust it, that is not going to, just discriminate your customers, for example. And then, of course, that's bad for your business. And we're just talking commercial uses, but when you think about police work and so on, we're really also talking about the democratic architecture of, of our societies. So the AI Act is part of this branch of the two branches, right? Part of the ecosystem of trust. Now, that doesn't mean that there are not other initiatives meant to do other things for artificial intelligence, like prepare the workforce, stimulate startups and innovation, investment, and so on. And we can go through more specifically, the package that luckily the Commission just put out. So I have, very good examples because it's out there. But those you do not do in a regulation. You cannot use the choice of instrument to have a regulation is not appropriate to say, okay, we're going to have a regulation that applies throughout the European Union, so a law, that makes people use AI more and makes venture capital more readily available to startups, and that makes EU AI startups more competitive. That's not a regulation. You got to do macroeconomic policy. You have to think about those types of interventions, not in a regulation. So that's why, of course, when you say, but the AI Act does not, I don't know, does not create an EU, very powerful EU AI that competes globally. No, that's not its purpose. It's in the part of basically making AI safer, more trustworthy, and therefore more likely to be adopted. That's its role. But, so with this big distinction, nevertheless, of course, it does have an impact on the entire system, right, and on innovation, and we had thought of that. So one of the things that, and I'll go through some of the things that we have done to support innovation, is throughout the text, we have made sure that when we deal with startups and SMEs, they have a different regime in terms of complying with this regulation, a more simplified regime, more guidelines, more support, and even different types of fines. If you're a startup and you build a system and you get fined, you really are in a different regime than somebody who is a mature company and gets fined for breaching the regulation. Then we worked on, and this is Parliament, a lot of the Parliament's contribution, we worked on strengthening this network of sandboxes around across the European Union, and we made them mandatory in each member state, so that startups can go to these sandboxes and test their products and see, okay, and not just test their products for compliance, but actually get to understand what they need to do to be compliant. And again, we're talking here about those AI systems and those startups who are building AI systems used in the high-risk use cases. We're not talking about artificial intelligence in agriculture, in transportation, and so on. Like, we're talking strictly those that are used in high-risk use cases. Then the whole discussion on the big, powerful models is also, the way we had thought about it is, instead of over-regulating those models and in setting rules for them, we have opted for a more flexible enforcement regulatory environment where you actually have the AI office, which is tasked to interact with the very powerful models. And those are just a few of them. I don't know if any of the startups or scale-ups or companies in Europe are at that level where they would fall under that category. But we have thought, okay, we are not at the point where we can set rules, very hard and strict rules for these models to make them safer. But what we can say is, okay, what will happen is they will have to work more with the office to make sure, and I'm sure that that's the intention in the market as well, to make sure that the models are safer. So even though the AI Act is basically meant to promote trust in the uptake of AI by making it safer, we had worked a lot throughout the text on making sure that it supports innovation and it supports startups and SMEs. Just a couple more examples, the exemption for R&D, which is, until you put the product on the market and it goes to consumers, to somebody who buys it and actually uses it, and you make money out of it, there are no obligations, no matter what you do. Of course, it would make little sense to research again, an AI system that does social scoring for all the citizens of Europe so that it can discriminate against them, because then if you want to put it on the market, you cannot. But we have thought throughout the regulation of innovation. So I don't think it's 0 or 1. I don't think it's black and white. I think it's a balancing act between stimulating in the future the trust in AI and therefore the uptake of AI. And on the other hand, making sure that we're not overburdening the market and we allow innovation and startups to continue to grow in Europe.
Absolutely, thank you. And thank you for shedding a light on some of the opportunities as well for SMEs and startups provided within the AI Act, and of course the sandboxes as well, which we'll see member states implementing. And you mentioned as well that you touched upon the Commission's AI innovation strategy. One particular thing of interest, I think, maybe to the audience was the so-called AI factories. I'm not sure if you've any insight into this or could provide any more information, but it's an interesting concept which I'd love to touch upon and maybe shed some light on for those not familiar with it.
Well, we were very much focused on the AI Act, so I wouldn't be able to, pretend that I know everything that the Commission has thought about on when they propose these AI factories. But I think that the very simple idea is that they are trying to leverage European supercomputers and to make the necessary adaptations to those supercomputers so that they can be used for training artificial intelligence, probably at, very powerful AI models or even less powerful, and to make these facilities more readily available to startups and SMEs. And I think that's brilliant. And I think that it's such a relief that in parallel with the fact that we worked on the AI Act, they have indeed, we have always pushed for that, and we will continue to push for it. They have thought indeed of the other pillar, right, like the ecosystem of excellence. So I think it's a brilliant initiative. I hope, like always, that there's going to be enough money for it because it's also part of budgeting. But the way I've scanned it initially, it looks like there's also money for it. And to me, that's a genius idea. Like we have these very powerful supercomputers. Let's make sure that startups can use them to train their models so that they have access to compute. So, in brief, that's my understanding of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and absolutely, resources and funding is certainly going to be a huge priority for the EU and Syria, not just for the innovation strategy, the factories, but also for implementing the EU AI Act and the establishment of the new bodies, the AI office, and so on. Absolutely. I'd just like to remind the audience, you can drop questions in. We will be turning to kind of global AI policy developments at the moment, but we will come back to all your comments towards the end. I see a couple of questions already, but we will jump back to those in just a moment. So the EU has been the first, well, will be the first to issue binding regional rules on AI, and essentially kind of setting a global standard. Some would say, some have compared it to the GDPR. Others have said perhaps there is a need for more caution and want to wait and see how things unfold in the EU rather than following suit directly. How do you see things unfolding, and how do you envision the EU's role in shaping AI policy globally? Great question.
This was one of our, and I'll have to go back a little bit in time. This was one of our top concerns even before the AI Act came into being. As you recall, Dragos was the chair of the AI Special Committee in the Parliament. And a lot of the work that we've done in that special committee, other than us, everybody learning about, AI and how it should be governed, and we did learn a lot in those 2 years of activity before we got to the regulation, was making sure that we have an international dimension in the back of our mind all the time. Because, of course, technology is global, right? And artificial intelligence even more so. So there is a need for international convergence on artificial intelligence. And, we're not the only ones to have realized it, right? And to have understood that. So going back to your GDPR example, the driving reason for this thinking is that I personally, I know Dragos as well, don't think that the AI Act will work exactly like the GDPR. The GDPR, although a very complex piece of legislation itself, is conceptually a little bit simpler, right? You know what personal data is, and you have a few definitions, and then you have rules to protect that. So that is very easy to copy and replicate across the world, and it has been replicated in many jurisdictions, and other jurisdictions just have to follow it because the business environment sees it, better to follow it so that it's compliant and it can enter the European market. But artificial intelligence, this AI Act is not perfect. We're regulating the unknown. We're setting, we're signposting the future. Here's what we want artificial intelligence to look like. We don't want it to do these bad things. We want it to be safe. We want it to be trustworthy. We want it to be human-centric. But these are concepts that will need to evolve based on developments. This is a very fast-moving technology, and of course, there's many questions about its adoption and so on, but it is fast-moving and it will change. So international convergence on, to begin with, the vocabulary of what is it exactly that we're trying to talk about here, all the way to the very high-level principles. Okay, this is not okay. All of these need to be agreed internationally. So we have been engaging with all of the initiatives. I'll save that for a later question if you want to delve more on the international initiatives. I'll go back to the AI Act and say that one of the major accomplishments, I think, of the Parliament, which is very often overlooked, is the fact that we have aligned the definition of artificial intelligence with that of the OECD. And that was a process, it wasn't, we just took it. We had worked together, with colleagues in the OECD to think about that definition. Incidentally, NIST in the United States has a very similar definition. So, that puts the the foundations of a common understanding of what we mean when we talk about artificial intelligence. So that is, and not just that, it's, the provisions that we have on how standards should be developed and so on, all of them take into account the international dimension. So we had that baked in a sense, in the AI Act, also to future-proof it in a sense. The AI office has component of collaborating internationally. And I really believe, going back to the fact that I don't necessarily think this is going to act exactly like the GDPR, that the next steps right after adoption will be to work to leverage our European diplomacy, to leverage our, even at a rather strategic level, and to participate in all of these initiatives to not, I wouldn't want to call it as harshly as export, but to influence all of these initiatives. So not necessarily that it's Europe leading the way, which of course is an ambition, and we are doing it with the AI Act, but also ensuring that convergence, right, among the different initiatives, so that we can all benefit from a common understanding of what are the rules and what exactly are we talking about. And then, if you want, if you we can go into the specific initiatives and how they match.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we jump into the other initiatives which the EU is engaged in at the moment, maybe we can just jump back to what you're saying about the need to obviously constantly update the AI Act as technology evolves, and as we also learn from best practices and other regulatory developments in different regions. You mentioned the AI office, but what kind of system is in place to ensure that we can take our learnings into account and adapt accordingly and to be in contact with other regulators globally?
Well, here, I would want to go at it from two directions. So one, I'll keep this one shorter. I think it's a good piece of regulation. I think, we worked on it a lot. It's not just Parliament, but the Commission was involved, and Council and the member states. And, most parts of the text are as such that they won't need updating. And I go back to the simple example of, social scoring for discriminating people based on, I don't know, their sexual orientation and so on. I don't see a need to update that very soon, right? Like that's fairly stable. We don't want social scoring, and we don't want the state to assign a score, leading to detrimental outcomes to any citizen, right? So some and most of the parts of the text are fairly stable because they deal with things that we know are in accordance with our values. Some parts of the text, indeed, will need to be updated. So, for example, the list of high-risk use cases, it might be the case that in the future, some of these uses will become so good, so safe, so beneficial that there will be absolutely no need for them to be on the on the list of high-risk systems. And that and several other parts of the text are amendable through comitology, that is through later implementing or delegated acts by the Commission. There is a future proofness in the regulation also for what we had introduced in the regulation, this new part on the big powerful AI models, and that flexibility comes from one, the codes of practice, that is the way to apply the rules of the regulation, that is literally defined between the Commission and industry, and that could be an iterative process. It could be fairly flexible in light of new technological developments on one hand. And again, as I said, the rules of basically having industry cooperate more and engaging more with the AI office to keep up with technological developments. So I think, on one hand, I wanted to put that out there because, of course, it's always a question, how are you going to keep up with technology? So on one hand, not many parts of the text will need to be updated. On the other hand, we didn't, of course, foresee the parts that will need to be updated constantly, and we had foreseen those mechanisms. And then if I had a third hand, but I don't, but then on the third hand, is the idea that eventually, if it will need to be updated, there's going to be an update of the regulation. But I think that we have struck the right balance in the text to have a solid regulation that we can actually, going back to the international dimension, that we can actually, be proud of internationally and offer as a model to others in international fora.
Mm-hmm. So the role of the AI office will include obviously engagement with industry stakeholders. Is there also the intention that it would be involved in kind of international government level discussions as well, or would that stay the role of the Commission, the Parliament, or?
Well, I'll talk a little bit about the AI office. So the short answer is definitely the AI office will need to be involved in the international fora, and in a sense, other than the tasks that it has right now, it was also our intention from the beginning. The AI office was, one of the babies of this cabinet. We wanted it from day one because of the flexibility of enforcement. That is, if you have an institution, you can be less strict and less prescriptive in the rules, but also because what I told you about the GDPR model and how AI will not necessarily be at the same level of ease, if I can call it that, in terms of becoming a gold standard internationally. So by design, the AI office was meant to have this international representation. Now, when we envisioned it, we envisioned a very big and powerful and almighty agency. But of course, in Brussels, when you say agency, people start, shaking a little bit, and then they are very reluctant to even read the word agency in the text. But if you do a Control F, I'm pretty sure that it's still stuck in there somewhere in a recital.
Maybe cleaned up, perhaps.
Uh, or maybe not. I don't know. Try it. But it became obvious that because of the way the budget is structured now and because of financial constraints, it would make more sense to have this structure for now in the commission, because an agency would mean more time for the member states to discuss its location and so on. Then it would mean budgeting separately for it. Then it would mean all the overhead costs, from, accounting to all of the people that are in charge of supporting an agency. So with the money that we could foresee at the time, it wasn't really possible to have an agency that would competently deal with all these tasks. And of course, there is all the experts in the European Commission and in different other areas of the Commission that have skills applicable to artificial intelligence. And even more so, you have the commission leverage in enforcing, especially when you think about the very big, powerful models. You want to have the commission behind you, right, to enforce when you need to enforce a rule or another. So for all these considerations, we have decided the AI office will rest within the commission. So then the AI office is the commission in a sense, but that representation, going back to your original question, I just took the opportunity to explain the office a little bit more. That representation, international representation, is definitely one of the tasks, and you probably can see it even in the decision to establish the office. Yep.
Great, thank you. So yeah, onto then the kind of global initiatives which you're working on. There is so much happening in the sphere at the moment, both at a multilateral and bilateral level. The OECD, G7, Bletchley Declaration recently. We have the Council of Europe, which are working on their AI convention at the moment as well. And then, of course, there's discussions, I think, next week with the EU-US Trade and Technology Council. So yeah, a lot for everyone to keep an eye on. Can you maybe share with us some of the kind of focus areas for 2024, or where you see the main discussions, driving discussions in ongoing in this area, which forums?
Yeah, definitely. So I think, like one big part of the AI conversation was the White House executive order, right? Which to me personally was surprisingly good, moving away from the initial just a few voluntary commitments, but actually going into the substance of it. And with the tools available at the administration's disposal, they put together something rather good that I think industry also applauded because it wasn't heavy, but it literally, to me, it seems very much aligned in terms of what we are trying to achieve here in Europe. So with that, now that we have, at least at the values level, we are aligned in the instruments that we've put forth. Of course, in the US, it's harder to pass regulation, and they have different tools at their disposal too. They have the federal agency, they have public procurement to influence the market in a way that we don't really have here. We have more hard regulation to do so. So that should enable, the more technical work in the TTC to proceed, right? To work more on vocabulary, to start working on some common understanding on the standards underpinning AI and so on. But I think it's encouraging, that in my view at least, there is an alignment here, and I think this transatlantic dimension is crucial for future more broad convergence on AI. The UK AI Safety Summit, I think, there was a niche, in a sense, there was a niche initiative, carving out a space for the UK to shine, and I think they, to a certain extent, they did, right? And because there are those more existential or significant risks, and they deliberately chose to focus on them. And truth to be told, the AI Act, for example, does not cover those existential risks. Those are more fit to be dealt with in fora such as the AI Safety Summit. Now, that remains to be seen. There is, of course, an upcoming edition in South Korea, and then we'll have one in Europe hosted by France. So it remains to be seen if it continues to hold momentum, or if everything that was meant to be said on it was said, right? Like, okay, well, these are the existential risks, and we want to guard against them. So, but I think that it could be a good initiative for that particular part of governing AI more into the future and less into the immediate, intangible risks now. Then, with the OECD, as I mentioned, we work very closely in discussing what exactly artificial intelligence is, and we're converging on that. In the Council of Europe Convention, we're not that involved, but from what we see in the news, of course, there is this tension between having it just for public or also for private entities. I think it would be a shame to just have it for public entities, because by its nature, it is a more flexible instrument, although it's binding, because it's negotiated in a broader format. So, the rules are not going to be as hard to comply with. So why then just apply them not apply them to private entities as well? I have to say, our main priority, like in the AI Act, we had a number of priorities, of which, as I said, the office was one of them. International alignment was another one. Then, of course, simplification and trying to avoid as much as possible overlaps and over-regulation. But our priority in this point in time is exactly this international dimension. It is making sure that all the threads, coming out of all these initiatives begin to converge and to be tied together, because they have a lot in common. Now they need to start converging, not just on terminology and ideas, but on actually on deliverables. So personally, and I know Dragos wants to do that too, we have, in the next few months, we have in our mission to actually engage with these partners and more, other partners who are thinking or working on either legislation or instruments for higher level governance of AI. So it's literally on our agenda. We're going to the UK, we're going to DC, hoping to go to Asia as well, Korea, Japan. So literally, it is because we believe that's very, very important.
And what role does standards play in this? We've mentioned it a couple of times, but haven't really gone into depth. I know the AI Act itself mandates the European standardization organizations to issue or respond to the Commission's standardization request, but obviously including international organizations will be important as well in the focus. So where do you see kind of the main discussions unfolding here, the TTC, or where's priority?
I think that in terms of standards, it's not just transatlantic. I think it's a good place to start, but I think the international standardization organizations are doing a good job. And it is part of what we have put in the AI Act, although it is indeed the European standardization organizations that are mandated to work on the standards. They are strongly encouraged to also take into account the international standards. And I think, in the end, it will be the standards that will ease the life of everybody in ensuring compliance with the AI Act. So, these are the top level rules, but now it all boils down to the development of standards. So they are crucial. And here, there's always a message to industry, whether it's European standardization organizations or others. The way to influence this process is to participate and to invest in it, right? And to be at the table, to invest the money, to invest the resources, to be at the drawing table for the upcoming standards, because they will be basically, in a few years' time, they will be the way to ensure compliance with the AI Act.
Absolutely. Fantastic. So we just have 5 minutes left, so I will jump to some of the questions. Firstly, we have a question from Mark on LinkedIn. Hi, Dan and Lydia. Can you give us more details on the latest approach to address foundation models? How should we achieve a balance between regulation and innovation? I think we've touched upon the regulation and innovation already, but maybe we could dive a bit deeper into the details of the the final approach on foundation models.
Yeah, definitely. So one not grammatical, lexicographical observation is that, but it does carry some weight, is that we had moved away from foundation models and into the space of general purpose AI models. We're still, of course, now in practical terms, you're still going to be covering mostly foundation models, but with that, we had worked to make the AI Act less actually technology neutral, not less or more. So because with this term, we're also covering future models. Who knows? The AI will certainly continue to surprise us, which are not foundation models by the definition that we have now. So we are covering in a very technology neutral way foundation models, but also other general purpose AI models. In terms of the obligations, I'm not going to go into the very nitty gritty of the text, but I think you have two broad categories. You have those, your traditional general purpose AI model, which in terms of obligations only has the obligation to document, to be transparent and to document some of the things that it does. It's just documentation basically and transparency. When you get into the second category are those models that can present systemic risks, right? So those models with systemic risk have additional obligations to have their models tested, right? It's not, at one point, there was this idea of having mandatory external testing. We moved away from it because we feel, okay, companies should be responsible to test their models, to document it, and to show, okay, we have tested the model for these risks. Where would you find those external evaluators coming in for every single model, right? But there is an obligation to test your model, and there is another obligation to have a risk management system in place for the model. Again, we're talking about the ones with systemic impact. Probably you can count them on a hand or two by the way we have defined them. And then there is an obligation to have an incident reporting mechanism. And of course, that collaboration with the AI office. Those are the main obligations, right? So transparency, documentation. And then for the bigger ones, the powerful ones, you have these measures that are really meant to prevent any systemic threats that might be emanating from these models, and also at the same time to help companies. Most of them are probably doing this anyway, but to help them, to build safer and more useful models.
Great. We have time just for one more question. If you could maybe keep your answer to 1 minute, but we have a question from Emmy on YouTube. When it comes to international AI governance, do you see more promise in a single centralized body or in strengthening existing institutions and clarifying how AI would come under their remit?
It's just 1 minute, no? I think both approaches have their merits. There's this debate that I'm engaging with a colleague with all the time about the role of multiple overlapping and competing institutions, and I think that they have a role, right? You go to that fora and you go to that fora and to that fora, and it's not quite the same. But it is a network of networks of networks of networks of networks of institutions that then work together, and then eventually the result is an equilibrium, right? So it's good that we have the OECD and the Council of Europe and the G7, and you have the GPI, the Global Partnership on AI, and you have maybe other initiatives and the Safety Summit. I think it's good that we have multiple of these. In one single centralized body that is probably emanating out of the UN, if that will be the case, when that will be the case, and if the UN can get everybody on board to establish such a body, it would probably have to be for some of the risks and for some of the threats that we have not yet foreseen when those threats and risks will come to the fore. But for now, I think that having all these fora for cooperation is good. Strengthening them is even better. Having them converge and get to a common understanding is wonderful.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. We have covered quite a lot in this short discussion, quite broad discussion, but thanks again. And there's a couple of questions which we will follow up with after in person. If you enjoyed today's discussion, please do hit subscribe to keep up to date on our upcoming podcasts. And thank you very much, Dan, for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure. And speak soon. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you, Lydia, and thank you to everybody.
Bye-bye.